Howdy, Lions. So right now we're going to talk about the carbon cycle. So I'm going to start pumping some gas here, and you can see the gas going in. Now, what is gasoline? It is a hydrocarbon. And what that means is carbon molecules that are attached to hydrogen molecules. Okay, so anything can be a hydrocarbon. That, for instance, sugar or fat, like fat. My Care Bear tummy here. There's a lot of hydrocarbons here. And if you drink a soda or a candy bar, or pasta or bread or rice or beans, anything like that, anything that's carbohydrates, those are hydrocarbons. That's why they're called carbohydrates. Gasoline is a complex hydrocarbon. Now, my truck here, when I turn it on and it's burning fuel, it will be part of the carbon cycle. As I'm breathing and talking to you right now, I am part of the carbon cycle because I'm breathing out carbon dioxide. The truck is going to create carbon dioxide when it burns the gasoline. So all these places, so me, respiration, bacteria, your dog and cat, your family, all humans, all animals are going to respire. So they're going to give off CO2. Every single car, regardless if it's gas, diesel, supercharged, whatever, they're all going to give off CO2. Every time something burns, it gives off CO2, and that includes fires like wildfires. That includes things like volcanoes. That includes things like fires in the rainforest or poor forestry techniques. Any kind of fire will create CO2. Also, every time something rots or decays, it's going to create CO2 if there's oxygen present. If there's not oxygen present, it's going to create CH4, which is methane gas, similar to farts, okay? So, like inside your gut, there isn't a constant flow of oxygen gas, so your body creates methane gas as well. Methane gas is created in swamps, it's created at the bottom of the ocean, it's created anytime something decomposes, particularly when there's not very much oxygen, then it's going to create CH4. Because it's carbon, it's going to be part of the carbon cycle. Now, then the question is, we got all this carbon dioxide going into the air, we got all this methane going into the air, where does it go from there? Stop. All right, so when we were back at the gas station, all right, that's a good spot. Now, when we were back at the gas station, we talked about carbon dioxide. Specifically, I put in hydrocarbons, gasoline, into my truck. My truck burned it and brought us here. So my truck burned hydrocarbons, created carbon dioxide, is now in the atmosphere. If you've already watched the nitrogen version or video, you understand that the truck also created NO2 gas. Now, this is a really unique spot. There's a lot of things going on here, and I'm going to try to explain as much of it in a way that you'll understand quickly. So, I am giving off carbon dioxide from my food. I ate food, there's hydrocarbons in my food, my body's burning that and giving off CO2. I put in hydrocarbons in my truck burned that and gave off CO2. So there's a lot of CO2 going up in the atmosphere. The question is, what takes it back out of the atmosphere? You've got both answers right here. Plants is the first one I'm going to give you. All of these plants, and Cal, show all the big willow trees around you and everything. All these big willow trees, and these bushes here are called button bush. These organisms all create. Hold it on the sides, son. Remember, hold it on the sides.
Yeah, I am.
Okay. Wow, there's so many fish. There's fish nibbling at my toes. Anyway, all of these plants are doing photosynthesis. In photosynthesis, plants take carbon dioxide out of the air and then they make sugars with it. Sugars are a type of hydrocarbon. And that's where carbon gets into food webs. We're not even going to say food chains anymore because that's kind of an outdated concept. But food webs, this complex web of living things, starting with plants, that's where carbon gets into it. These plants, you see the green color in the water? This is algae growing in the water. All the little fish that are nibbling at my toes right now are eating the algae and little small plants growing on the rocks and things like that. That's how they get carbon. Those little fish are swimming around. They're going to get eaten by bigger fish, which are out here someplace. And that's how they get carbon, and it goes up the food web, and people eat the fish, and that's how carbon gets into them. Now, that's carbon in the living ecosystem. Now, all those creatures poop, pee, or die, right? So every time something poops, like these fish that are nibbling at my toes, they are pooping and peeing and respiring, and they're giving off CO2. And all the dead fish in here, fish poop, everything else, that's all got to go somewhere. Well, it decomposes, and if there's oxygen available, it becomes carbon dioxide again. Or if there's not oxygen available, it becomes methane, CH4. Okay? Now, that's kind of wraps up carbon dioxide, except for one other thing. There's one other thing that takes carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, and I'm standing in it. It's water. Okay? So every time water interacts with the atmosphere, or wind blowing and seeing these waves churning up, every time the air touches water, you're going to get a chemical reaction between CO2 and H2O. It's going to create H2CO3, which is carbonic acid. It's a very, very weak acid, but it happens all over the globe. Every time it rains from these big clouds, every time wind blows over the surface of the ocean or of this lake here, then some carbonic acid is going to form, and that CO2 is now taken out of the atmosphere and stored in the water. Let's talk about methane for a second. Methane is created when things decompose without very much oxygen available. The bacteria are going to be creating this methane gas. Now, this lake that I'm standing in, Lake Louisville, it's not actually a natural lake at all. It's a reservoir. It was dammed up. The dam is on the south end of the lake down that way. Now, it was dammed up, and all of the organic matter that washes into this lake, fish nibbling. Anyway, loads of little fish. Anyway, all the dead fish, all the dead leaves, all the dead grass, all the organic garbage, every sandwich that gets thrown out of people's cars, things like that, every time a jet skier pees in the water, everything else, all that organic material is carbon-based, is carbon-based, and it's going to be sitting here and rotting on the bottom of this lake without very much oxygen available. And so these big impoundments take a lot of criticism from the environmental movement because they are not carbon neutral. That's one of the major misconceptions about these lakes. It is a wild living ecosystem, but it's not actually natural, and it is creating a carbon footprint because all this organic matter on the bottom is decomposing and either making CO2 or methane. Methane is a very potent greenhouse gas, and we'll talk about the greenhouse effect later, but CO2 is the greenhouse gas we talk the most about because humans have a huge impact on it. Methane is also a greenhouse gas that is secondarily talked about, but it is a much more potent greenhouse gas. So it is just as important thing to discuss. Mankind has a huge impact on the CO2, the carbon dioxide. There's so many little fish. Wow, it's so weird. Like there's constant nibbling. Sorry. Anyway, mankind has a huge impact on CO2 because of the transportation sector. We're digging up oil out of the ground. We're digging up natural gas out of the ground. We're burning it in vehicles and heaters and all sorts of things. And we're putting it back into the atmosphere where it was not. It was locked up deep underground. We burned it and put it back into the atmosphere, and it throws off the balance of things that have evolved over the last few million years. So since the Industrial Revolution, mankind has had a huge impact on carbon footprint. Also the fact that there's over 7 billion of us, there's almost 8 billion of us now. There's a huge amount of organisms, there's a huge amount of cars, there's a huge amount of factories, a huge amount of power plants. That's all adding carbon. And so we talk about mankind's impact on the carbon cycle a great deal when we talk about CO2. Now, other things we do also create methane problems. For instance, global warming creates a methane problem. Huge impoundments like this create methane problems. Garbage dumps create a huge methane problem. The huge municipal city dumps where all our garbage is rotting without oxygen and giving off methane. Those are all issues that relate directly to the carbon cycle and directly to us and our behavior.